Hello, I'm Peter Borgen, librarian at the Hamline Midway Library in St. Paul, Minnesota. This is our 27th year of hosting the Fireside Reading Series, and we're thrilled to be able to carry on the tradition even in this unusual year. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Fireside Reading Series from our fireside. If you are here, we would love to offer you cookies and coffee or tea, and we'd all squeeze into our children's area for the evening and listen to great writers read from their books and talk with them about their work. Obviously, this year is different, and we are happy that you have chosen to join us in this new format to carry on our long tradition. Tonight, we are happy to feature Lin Enger with her book, American Gospel. The St. Paul Public Libraries have copies of our featured authors' books available for contactless pickup here at the Hamline Midway Library or via Library Express services at other library locations. You can find all the details on our website at www.sppl.org. I hope you're cozy wherever you are and that you enjoy tonight's event. Thank you for spending time with us.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome this evening to Fireside with the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I'm Wendy Worden, Programs and Services Assistant for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. And as we get started this evening, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land from which I broadcast tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe peoples are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. On to our main event. Fireside is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We are so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. We will begin with a reading and then open things up to questions from you. We will be following this program up with a brief survey to get your feedback, so do be on the lookout for that. You can pop your questions into the chat at any point throughout the evening. We have partnered with Next Chapter Bookseller in St. Paul, and they have created a page with our featured books, so do check that out if you feel so inclined to pick up any of the books you hear about in the series. As Peter said, we are pleased to have Lin Enger with us this evening. Lin has published two previous novels, Undiscovered Country and The High Divide. Is a finalist for the Midwest Booksellers Association, the Society of Midland Authors, and Reading the West. His stories have been published in literary journals such as Glimmer Train, Ascent, and American Fiction. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, he has received a James Michener Award, a Minnesota State Arts Board Fellowship, and a Jerome Travel Grant. He teaches English at Minnesota State University Moorhead. Welcome, Lin.
Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to, like Wendy said, I'm going to read and talk for about 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll be opened up for questions. So as long as Zoom works and treats us right, all will be well. And it seems like everything's working well from my end. I hope everyone can hear me. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my novel, American Gospel. It's set in 1974, a month in American history that is famous, infamous. It was the month that Richard Nixon resigned as president. So while that's going on in the background in this novel, on a lake in northern Minnesota, an old man, a farmer turned preacher, survives a near-death experience. That's how the novel begins. And during that experience, he has a vision that the rapture is going to occur in just 14 days on August 19th. The novel then that proceeds from that moment is a countdown of those 14 days, the story rotating among three characters. The prophet himself, who's a 73-year-old farmer slash preacher. His name is Enoch. His son, Peter, who's a skeptical New York writer. And the third character is a young Hollywood actress named Melanie Magnus, an Oscar winner who happened to grow up next door to the prophet. And when she hears of his prediction, she returns to Minnesota. And that return home isn't lost on the media. And the world's attention then comes to bear on Enoch's prophecy. Pilgrims and journalists descend on what becomes ground zero for the end of the world. So that's a summary of the story's premise. But let me give you an aerial view and suggest how I think the story is especially pertinent to our time, to our present moment. It's a book about faith. It's a book about heartland America. It's a book that explores how people whose desire for simplistic, comforting answers to complicated problems set themselves up to be terribly misled. Looking around, it's not hard to find somebody trying to persuade us how to think, what to think, where to fall in line. It's often a political or religious leader with charisma and confidence. The politician who scapegoats segments of the population, who points fingers but doesn't take responsibility. The politician who claims to have all the answers. The religious leader who's fond of naming and blaming some enemy, who claims to have the last word on every point of doctrine, or in the case of my novel, claims to know the very date of the end of the world. In life, sadly, people flock to these demagogues. They form cults around them because their messages give people a sense that they can exert control over a difficult, complicated world. In fact, in the last months, we've watched as such a cult, a nationwide cult of personality has unraveled. It's invented reality leading to an armed insurrection of the nation's capital. I want to add here that my novel doesn't undermine the importance or the value of religion or belief. It does make a distinction between religious dogma, which puts a straitjacket on faith, and religious mystery, where faith's indefinable powers actually lie. I think I'm going to take a little break from talking, and I'm going to read the first page and a half of the book, just so you can hear the voice of the story if you haven't sampled it yet. The book is arranged, by chapters, and each chapter is a day. So the first day is August 6th, Tuesday. Turn, if you will, back to 1974 and the cathartic end of that long summer, a pivot in time that requires only the smallest adjustment. Now rise to an altitude that offers a view of the whole continent, the entire span of desert, mountain, lake, fruited field, towered city, ocean, shore. From this height, look down and pick them out, these ordinary, remarkable people, three of them, flesh of your flesh, a man, a woman, another man. Bring them into focus. Squint if you need to. There on a small farm beside a lavender blue lake in the center of the northern forest, the first man is getting dressed in his upstairs room. Worn denim shirt, lace-up boots, awake before the sun, as always. Tall and straight and bone-thin, white hair unshorn. He is simple in appearance only, this self-appointed prophet. Watch him as he descends the narrow staircase of his turn-of-the-century farmhouse, anticipating his coffee, unaware that he's just minutes away from dying. The woman way off in the California desert is still young, barely 30, asleep this morning in her waterbed, palm trees outside her window, 3 hours from waking to the life she once believed was charmed, and which still might be. She's lovely, an actress, with hair like the August wheat of the great Midwest. Her face is one that absorbs desire and sends back love. Not long ago, she was a child in the hands of goddess makers, celebrated and pampered, lusted after. Was she happy? She might have believed so, but now she feels only pain, the kind of pain that calls for routine numbing. And finally, to the other coast in its city of high towers, New York, where the other man, son of the prophet, has stayed up all night, writing, talking, and drinking. He often jogs the 7 blocks west from the all-night tavern that he favors to his 3rd floor walk up in the village, anxious to spend a little time in bed with his girlfriend before she leaves for work. This morning, though, he is in no hurry and even stops to sit on a bench in Washington Square, have a smoke. The sun is just up, light coming in from that low angle that scrubs the world, making everything look cleaner than it is. The sooty bricks, the street, the yellow cabs. And he thinks of the 20,000 indigent souls that lie beneath his feet, buried here when this place was a potter's field. He can't help an irrational stitch of guilt for the good fortune about to befall him. But I've earned it, he thinks. Like his father, like the actress, like all of us, he is unable to see the disappointments and reversals and confounding victories to come. He knows only what he knows, which is far less than he imagines. So that's how the book begins. I wrote an early draft of this novel 30 years ago. The characters who populated that manuscript are largely the same ones as those who animate the finished book. The story itself was meandering and listless. When I came back to the book 30 years later, after 3 decades, and it was stored in a trunk for those 3 decades, I did so with an idea for how I could give shape to the story, to a shapeless story. And that idea was Enoch's conviction that God had revealed to him the particular moment of the world's end. What I didn't know was whether to set the novel in the present moment or sometime in the past. I thought that if I set it in the present, there might be suspense for the reader in wondering, is it going to happen? Is the rapture going to happen? Is that how the book will end? But then I realized that I wasn't really very interested in the rapture as an eschatological event, as an explanation for how the world or the novel might end. I was interested in the characters themselves and why they believed what they believed and what motivated them and what might cause them to change. So I set the book in the past, and the 70s seemed like the right decade. With its focus on environmental and nuclear fears, and also with its obsession with religious apocalypse. Also, the 70s was a period when America woke up to the fact that we had been deceived by our political leaders for a long time. There was Watergate, of course, and Nixon's subsequent resignation. There was also the Vietnam War, which had dragged on for, more than a decade, even though we learned from the publication of the Pentagon Papers in the early 70s that national leaders in the highest places knew since the mid-60s that war was unwinnable. It was a fruitless effort. What I didn't realize when I chose the 70s as the setting for this story, I didn't realize how much the novel, when it was released, would resonate with our present moment. I'm going to read, before I stop talking, I'm going to read one more passage. And this passage, if you're reading along, starts on page 19, I believe. And it I think it'll give you some sense of the relationship between Enoch the prophet and Peter, his son. It also includes the vision that sets this whole story in motion. And at the end of it, I feel like there's a little bit of a hint as to how the religious and political arenas are intertwined in this novel, and of course how they still are today. So I'm on page 19 toward the bottom, and at this point in the story, the old man Enoch has had a cardiac arrest. He's in the hospital. It's late at night, after midnight. His son has flown back from New York City that day to see him, thinking he might not survive. And his son has visited him in the hospital and has since then gone to the farm/commune where Enoch lives with a few followers. Now Peter, his son, is there staying at his dad's farmhouse. And Enoch from the hospital room calls Peter because he feels like they need to talk. He's told him already about his vision, but he feels like he has to explain himself a little further. So bottom of page 19. He sits up in bed now, opens the drawer of the nightstand and fumbles for his pocket watch, whose glow-in-the-dark hands show 12:37 a.m. He lifts the bedside phone, sets it on his chest, and dials his own number. Let him answer, he prays, which Peter does on the fourth ring, his voice sounding high and full of something like relief or maybe hope. Hello? Peter, it's Dad. Ah, disappointment. Who'd you think it was? Is everything all right? Peter asks. I dropped a bomb earlier and thought I should explain things better. Peter is silent for a moment, then says, do you want some advice, Dad? That stuff about August 19th, it makes you sound like a fucking lunatic. Best not to talk about it. Enoch winces. You should hear the whole thing before you write me off. Peter moans, a resigned moan, but it's an opening nonetheless, and Enoch doesn't let it pass. He describes walking out on the porch with his coffee yesterday, new sun lighting up the chrome steel cross at the top of his barn and touching the tall obelisk of black granite in the Lutheran cemetery to the west, past his neighbor's hog farm. He recounts to Peter the smell of bacon frying and Victor's monotone voice coming to him through the screen a couple of minutes, and how he stepped down into the yard to check on the struggling buckeye tree. That's when he felt a vague tickle in his throat, but no pain whatsoever as his heart spiked to 400 beats a minute, its lower chambers reduced to an ineffectual quiver, this, according to the doctor. First, the ground beneath him disappeared, then the buckeye tree, and finally the sky itself, a dark wash rising up on all sides and lifting him, astounded, to a promontory high over the sea. What sea it was he didn't know, but the sun was a blood orange hanging above it. Then a voice from behind caused him to turn, and he saw a woman, tall as a spruce and wearing a gown of water, her hair a blue flame. Watch, she said, and count the days. Which Enoch did, turning in time to see the sun fall like an egg from a table down into the sea and blacking out the world. One, Enoch thought, but it was already roaring up behind him, a bright, booming spotlight, and climbing to its zenith before dropping and disappearing again. Two. Then it was back once more, rising and falling, which it did again and again and again, until a storm arrived, a wind so terrible the earth pitched like a great mad bull. Enoch could feel beneath him the land itself being urged across a wide vastness, until finally he was back at his own place. And all of this, Peter, while I was lying on the ground, more or less dead. You say she had blue hair, this angel? His son doesn't even try to hide the scorn in his voice. Maybe it was your mom, Grandma. Remember the dye she used to use, the way it glowed in the sun? And she always had a thing about the end of the world. This was not your grandmother, Peter. Make fun all you like, but you heard what the doctor said. And I know what I saw. 14 sunsets, 14 days. Not 15, not 13, Peter says. Let me finish, please. The sound I heard then, coming from an opening in the clouds, it was as if all humanity were present, exercising their lungs. I was standing in the pasture behind the house, next to the rock pile, with you beside me, and others too. A whole crowd of us, looking up at the roiling sky, the noise above us rising to a great shout. Today is the 6th, Dad. 6 plus 14 makes 20, not 19. Didn't you say August 19th? Yes, because tonight would have been the first sunset. Not to mention, the 19th of August has always been a significant date for me. It was your mother's and my anniversary, of course. But this isn't about me. Look what's happening in the world. The Middle East, my heavens, Armageddon just around the corner. And here at home, what they're doing to Nixon? Look what he's done to us. Enoch tells himself to remain calm. I will only remind you, there is no power but of God, and the powers that be are ordained of God. That's St. Paul from the book of Romans. The president was placed where he is, and we ought to be praying for him, not working against him. Bullshit, Dad. You'd rather be deceived than have to think for yourself. I'll stop there. I think at this point, open it up for any questions there might be.
Thanks so much for that. I love the relationship between Enoch and Peter, and that, you know, maybe it was Grandma. Like, that's one of my favorite indicators of character. Like, can we talk about something else? Can we be real for a second? I love that. One of our attendees, Helen, says, I think, also calling back to your remarks about, you know, not undermining religious devotion, but you know, being interested in it. You portray some sympathy for Enoch. What were your feelings for his particular character? Or maybe what were you sort of thinking, you know, having fun with?
Yeah. No, I love Enoch. And I think in most respects, Enoch is a good person. I think he's badly self-deceived. I think that he has clear issues of grandiosity. You know, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know how he would be, you know, diagnosed, but he has something going on. I love all my characters. I love Enoch, and it was very easy for me to write that character from inside his head. I've known a lot of Enochs, and most of them I liked, even if sometimes I wanted to run away from them as fast as I could. But he's well-meaning. He's done some good in his life. I think he's you know, I could go on and on about the mistakes he's made, but I really admire him in many respects. And he's fallen badly off course in allowing himself to think that he has that kind of direct line to God Almighty. It's a terrible error and a terrible arrogance that he's fallen into. But nonetheless, as I wrote the story, what I didn't want to do, I didn't want to make fun of him. I don't see this book as mocking Enoch. And I wanted to write, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the ending, but I didn't want to write an ending that would completely throw him off the cliff. I wanted an ending, at least give him the opportunity to redeem himself. I had a professor in graduate school, and he said, no matter what character you write, you need to offer that character at least a glimmer of light. And I've never forgotten that advice, and I certainly wanted to offer Enoch a glimmer of light. I think he deserves it. but he also deserves to be completely discredited. So yeah, I loved Enoch, and I loved writing him. I thought he was a fantastically enjoyable character to create and to inhabit as a writer. I loved inhabiting him because he's so wildly interesting and wacko in some ways.
Yes.
Great question,
yes.
though. Great question.
That's fantastic. I was, always super curious about, lots of people are actually asking about characters, so I'm really excited to get at some of these. While we're on the Enoch subject,
Yeah.
Were you thinking anything about biblical Enoch, in connection there, or were you just grabbing a biblical name because it was, you needed that resonance?
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. Names for me are often highly intuitive, but with this name, it was very carefully chosen because Enoch in the Old Testament is a character who does not experience mortal death. I can't quote to you, what exactly the text says, but he's such a good guy that God just plucks him up right off the earth and doesn't make him experience the deterioration and death that all of us have to experience. So he goes from mortal man to a immortal soul, just like that. And so it seemed to me that given that story, that Enoch was a good name for a man who imagines himself chosen by God to tell the world when the world is going to end. So he imagines that Enoch's fate, for Old Testament Enoch's fate, is his fate as well. So yeah, that was a carefully chosen name, more carefully than most names I choose for my fictional characters.
Got a fun family relations question here, mostly that your brother's book also recently has a character become a Hollywood director, so you've got this hometown Hollywood connection. Was there someone from your home area who became some sort of celebrity? I mean, that's just a silly
No, not that I'm aware of. I think that's just that Leif and I often find ourselves thinking in the same way. It's interesting because we were writing the first drafts of that book, Virgil Wander, which is, if you haven't read it, you should read it. That book, and I was writing American Gospel at the same time. And in fact, it was the same month in 2017 that we exchanged manuscripts. And I read his and he read mine at the same time. And so that was just a coincidence. What we do not do is we do not read each other's work until we're done, till we're finished and ready to send it to our agents. So in this case, that was just a strange coincidence. No, and I don't know where it comes from. We've never talked about it. In fact, I didn't even think about what you just said, or the person just suggested until you said it. I didn't even, now that you say it, yeah, I guess so. I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. My sister and I often find our heads in the same space without realizing why. It's just
you drink from the same water growing up, breathing the same air,
Yep. We've got a question here about the dynamics of the 1970s versus the 2020s, and how do you think the story might have unfurled differently if you had set it in the present day?
Oh, wow. I don't know that I can even begin to answer that question, because although some of the, like I already suggested, some of the factors in play are similar. What happened in 2020 makes the 70s look tame politically, I think. And so I don't think I can even begin to answer that question. When I'm writing a novel, the setting, both the time and the place, fuel the story. And, the writer lives the story, and the story, it feels like it's happening around me when I'm writing it. So I can't even begin to tell you how setting it in a different time, how the story would play out. I can tell you it would be different. It would be a different story completely, but I don't even know what to say.
That is an entirely fair answer, but also a good one as far as, you know, that sense of really living the story, and it's a fantastic insight on how you get into place to write something.
I mean, I think obviously the one of the correlations is the whole theme of deception. This novel is about people being deceived by someone, whether that person deceiving them, in this case, the prophet Enoch, is doing it wittingly or unwittingly. We can argue about that. I don't know that I have the answer. But that kind of deception where you have essentially a cult, we saw that play, we've seen that on a massive scale in 2020, as far as I'm concerned. And so that would have come into play in the novel. It would have been a far more political novel had I written it or said it. If I were writing it now, setting it in 2020, it'd be far more political than it is as is, in a direct way, in an overt way. I guess I could say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you're circling around something that connects here to a question from Margie, who's going to be with us in a couple of weeks. Hi, Margie. By writing about Enoch, did you come to any understanding about why or how people fall into this kind of fantastical thinking and conspiracy theories? She says parenthetically.
Gosh, it's such a hard question. I mean, it's such a timely question, and I've thought about it a lot too. You know, I guess a lot of it seems to come down to a need for control. I mean, we all have to find ways to control what forces and factors that are uncontrollable in our lives, and I think that's a lot of it. There's a real desire in people, one, to connect with something that gives us greater meaning, and that's certainly something that the people who are listening to Enoch are doing. I mean, they're hearing him, and they're finding it that in his promise there's hope for a transcendent meaning, and also control. And in the case of Melanie Magnus, the actress, her life right now, at this point as the novel begins, is out of control. And she believes Enoch, she knows Enoch is a good man. She experienced his goodness, and she believes his connection to God. She experienced it. And so when he is the person who has the message that he has, it's a lifeline to her, because she's looking for an exit. She's looking for a way out of her problems. And if Enoch is right, there's her lifeline, there's her exit. So, you know, I think often those kinds of what seem strange conspiracies, I mean, they do offer hope. They do offer answers of a kind of simple to understand clarity that is tempting. But in fact, I don't think that the answers that are going to help us much are usually that simple or that clear, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks. This is a question related to one that I actually had. This Anna Maria says, I've heard other authors say that their characters come to them and bring their stories along. And I was wondering, you know, because all of your characters have these just glorious real backstories. And how do you, and Anna Maria says, you know, how do you craft your tales? And I was very curious on, you know, are you brainstorming characters' backstory beforehand, or does that sort of develop midstream?
Both. Both. I do usually come into the actual composition of the story, actually writing the story, once I have a sense of kind of who I'm dealing with, at least the main players. But I often haven't worked out their background at great detail. That kind of happens as the story dictates. And one has to be careful, I think, especially when starting a novel, not to allow yourself to go too deep into their histories, because that can really form a drag on the story's momentum. So often what will happen in a first draft, what I'll do is I'll develop those backstories as I'm writing through the novel. And then as I write the second, third, fourth, and fifth drafts, I'm cutting stuff out, leaving only what's necessary to the story's foreground. But the answer to Anna Maria's question is both. I do want to go into the composition of a novel having some sense of where it's going to take me, if not, a perfectly clear sense. But I kind of know where I'm going. But as I write, of course, the characters do change, and they interact with each other in ways I hadn't anticipated. New characters show up that certainly I didn't even imagine would show up, but they'd show up. And then the story, as it unfolds, requires the invention of some characters for some purpose that the narrative exposes as it appears on the page. So it's a very complicated, fluid process. I mean, there's no simple answer to it. I can say, though, it's a delightful process. And I think a writer has to be open to all kinds of wonderful surprises, because they do happen. Writing is a generative activity. As you write, ideas are generated by the process of writing in a different way than as we sit and think. It's a different process. If I waited until everything was clear in my head, I'd never ever write the book. It's in writing the book that the book reveals itself. And so it's an act of, speaking of faith, it is an act of faith to write a long story for me, because I don't really know what's going to happen. And I just have to trust that something will, and that what that something is will be interesting, because that's another question. Will it be interesting to anybody besides me? And of course, that's an act of vanity by itself, just to imagine that it will be. I'm serious when I say that, read Ecclesiastes. It is an act of vanity, I think, probably.
Yes, in the best possible way.
I hope so.
I don't know. As a creative person, I have to believe that, or my entire foundation falls apart under me.
Right. We don't want to go too far out on that limb.
No, I really appreciated Peter's backstory, especially the baseball. The whole baseball arc just seemed like it could be a short piece by itself. I don't know. I appreciated it.
Baseball usually finds a way into my stories.
Yeah. We've got the perennial question, she says, from Narita. I'm wondering how you balance your writing life, your teaching life, and your family life. Not very well.
It's impossible. No, I mean, actually, I've been teaching for 35 years and writing for at least that long. So it changes from era to era. I mean, there's the era of, being without kids, the era with little children. There's the era of older kids. There's the era of my age now. I used to write in the middle of the night for years. I wrote in the middle of the night until I almost wrote myself to death, literally. I just had a physical breakdown. And this novel was the most orderly in how I approached the composition of it. I did it all of it during the day. I write in the morning, in the library at Minnesota State University, they were kind enough to give me my own writing room there, not my office at work, in where I teach. I would get up in the morning at 8. I'd go into my writing room in the library. I would write until noon. I'd teach in the afternoon, and at night I would have my evening. And that's how I did this book. But my other books were a lot messier in terms of how I tried to find time to do them. So you know, it's complicated to balance teaching with writing, but in a beautiful way, I think my teaching has informed my writing and vice versa now. Over years now, I can look back and see that. I think I'm a better teacher for my writing, and I hope I'm a better writer for my teaching. And so I don't regret any of either the demands of teaching, which I still enjoy doing, and I certainly enjoy writing more now than I've ever enjoyed it. So I found a balance, but sometimes it's been pretty impossible, and sometimes I haven't given enough time to people or time to either the writing or the teaching. You just have to turn your attention to what's most needed in a given moment. It hasn't been simple. I think you get that idea.
I've got this is another fun question. We've brought up siblings before, and I think someone asked this of Louise Erdrich when we were talking to her a few months ago, or was it just a month ago? I don't know. Time has no meaning. But you know, how is it that both you and your brother are such fine authors? What was your literary milieu like growing up, or your?
Well, it's a good question. We had good storytellers for parents. Our grandparents were good storytellers. I think we grew up listening to our elders tell good stories about their own lives and the histories of their towns and their relatives. And so we kind of grew up with that, I think, that internalized sense of narrative. Leif has just natural linguistic gifts. He was writing, and I say this literally, publishing poems when he was in second grade. So he had a gift for language that always has astounded me. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the storytelling came pretty naturally, and at least in Leif's case, the language for telling those stories came naturally. But I think it's certainly odd that we both ended up writing novels. We have two other siblings who are equally good storytellers, I think, in just, you know, in their daily coming and going. But we just happened to decide that we wanted to write the stories down, and so we have. But yeah, it's just odd. It's a quirky thing.
It's a pretty delightful thing, honestly.
It is. It's been fun. It's been very fun.
Susan is asking another Enoch question because he's a fascinating character. We can't get enough of him.
Yeah.
Is there any rational argument that might have changed his mind about the certainty of the approaching rapture?
Well, maybe so. You know, maybe the right person, although he is approached seriously by his friend and lover, and she knows that he's off track. She understands dreaming. She's a kind of Jungian thinker, and she understands dreams, and she knows that his dream is meaningful. But she also tells him that he's completely misunderstanding it. So if he's going to listen to someone, you'd think he'd listen to her. He does have, I don't know if I could point to them now, but I know there are moments in the novel where he has second thoughts. He has some doubts. He shouts those doubts down on his own. He has a deep, deep need for his life to amount to something grand. And he thinks this this will meet that need, obviously. I mean, it's a psychological hole in him that this vision fills. And it's a hole, I think, that's been growing for a good share of his life. But yeah, I don't know quite how to answer that question. I tried to give him that out all as I wrote it. I tried to give him an opportunity to back down. I mean, his son challenges him. The people who he probably loves the most do challenge him, and it doesn't help. So maybe not. Maybe nobody could convince him otherwise.
I'm gonna indulge myself here, because I love hearing about writers who have put books aside, manuscripts aside for a number of reasons, and I'm always curious if it stays with you, or if it comes back at some point, and it's at that point you realize, oh, this is maybe now is actually the time.
Yeah.
For this book. How did you come back to this particular story?
Well, like I say, I finished this book in about 1990. I started writing it in graduate school, and I finished it. It took me a couple of years to finish it then, and I put it away. I put it away about 1990. It was finished. And I did think about it from time to time. But I also, once in a while, like every 10 years, would pull it out and look at it. And every time I did, I was horrified by it, because it was so, not that the writing was terrible, the writing was good. Not that there weren't fascinating characters, because I thought they were. But the story didn't hang together. It was very, it was all over the place. And I didn't know what to do with it. I would say the reason it got revised is mostly because my wife Kathy, who said to me I finished my last previous novel and was kind of heading toward this other one I was going to write. And she said, you really should go back to the book in the trunk. You did spend 2 years on that, and I think you should try to resurrect it. And I really do listen to her, value her opinion. And so when she said that, I said, okay, I will try to. And about that same time, a few things happened that gave me this idea about writing about a person who believes they know the date of the end of the world. And so I decided I would try that plot on these characters, because that wasn't in the early draft. It lacked a good plot. And so I tried it. And once I started it over, I threw out the book. I mean, that book is gone. I mean, the words, everything has changed. I think 2 scenes from that novel survived. Two scenes survived. Maybe 3 pages from that novel are in this book. But she asked me to try it. I tried it, and it worked. So that's how it happened.
Just keep opening up more. I'm like, oh, the rapture wasn't in it? What? Because it's so, I mean, that is the book. And I think one of the things that I liked maybe most about it was just how concisely made it was, because it just was bounded so neatly by that framework. And
that was why it was easy to write. When I came back to it, that's what made it easy to write. I quickly decided I was going to write a book that unfolds in 2 weeks, according to that countdown. And once I had that, it was just like, wow, I did write it fast. I mean, I rewrote it over years, but the first draft came just so fast that I can't even hardly remember writing it, because of what you just said. I mean, I had that really neat packaged premise, and the parameters were so tight that I didn't have to try to figure out long gaps of time and all kinds of complicated elements that novel writing usually requires. This was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I find myself very, very envious of that sense of not having those long gaps of time, and
Right.
It was just like, oh yeah, this is a good way to do things. You need that particular conceit of like a date has been set, Here's
Right.
the end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I almost felt like I was cheating a little bit.
You were absolutely
Right.
no.
Yeah.
And I think here's a question about events that have happened similar to this in our actual reality. And when our questioner asks, did events in Waco or even Oregon give you a sense of dread about returning to this book, because there is that real stickiness around these sort of people have gathered and yeah.
Oh, I know. I think what those kinds of events did for me as I was writing is they tempted me, Waco, Jonestown, Ruby Ridge, all these stories we have about these kinds of communes and how they can end in violent purging events. It did tempt me to write a book that would have been far more violent than this one turns out to be. It tempted me. Actually, though, what I was more inspired by were characters like Harold Camping in 2011, and he was a man who ran a religious radio station in California, and he also was very much into numerology and eschatology, and he broadcast very publicly. A lot of people were involved in this. In 2011, he broadcast across his airwaves that the rapture was going to happen on, I think it was May 21st, 2011. And he had people from across the country flock to him. Some of them sold their homes and gave him the money. He used that money to send buses and proselytizers across the country. And this might have been an inspiration for me, because on graduation day at Minnesota State University in early May in 2011, I was walking to graduation ceremony, and what do I see but a huge bus with the rapture's coming on May 21st, right there in front of the building where our graduation is. And they were on megaphones telling the crowd coming into graduation and then leaving graduation that we better prepare ourselves for the end. That was about the time I was thinking, hey, I think I know how I'm going to write this novel. So, but, this happened. And of course, Harold Camping's, guess what? It didn't happen on May 21st. What never happens is these people that make these predictions never come out the next day and say, you know what? I am an ass. And I apologize. I screwed up. And if I were living, 3,000 years ago, I would be stoned to death. But in fact, what they do is they just say, well, I might have just calculated wrong. That to me makes me furious. It makes me furious. So I had more that kind of character in mind than I had maybe Waco or Jonestown. But I certainly was thinking of those situations as well.
Yeah, that was weird. I had forgotten about all of that, but I definitely remember.
It happens every few years, though.
It does.
I mean, it isn't unusual. America is full of false prophets, especially of the evangelical sort, and they don't have any shame. I won't even get started on the ones who predicted a different election result. I won't even get started because I will never stop.
No. Okay, we've got just a couple of minutes left, and I know not everyone can share these sorts of things, but are you working on something now that you can talk about, or is there something that's grabbing you?
I am trying to get started on something. I will admit that the pandemic year has not been a fruitful one for me creatively. So I do have some ideas. I have some scribbled notes, but I have not plunged myself into the composition of a book. I hope to soon. And I think as we start to return to some normality, it will happen. But for me too, my writing life has been sort of feast or famine. When I'm writing well on a project, I'm obsessively working on it. I will go sometimes a year without writing a word, even 2 years without writing a word. But then once I get started on a novel, I might write every day for 5 years on it. So once I get started, I mean, it's the real deal until I'm done. And that means, you know, sometime every day for years. And so I'm a slogger. I really slog, obsessively slog. But when I'm not in the middle of a project, then, you know, it's kind of like, I'm just thinking, teaching, reading, thinking, trying to figure out what the next project should be, what shape it should take.
Thank you for that. I love, it's one of the things I love about having a chance to talk to writers is you get a sense for all of the different ways there are to be a writer.
There's no right way. No, there's no right way. You have to find what works for you, but it doesn't usually work for the next person.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time this evening, Lynn.
Thank you, Wendy.
And audience, thank you for your attention and your presence here this evening. I did mention this in the chat, but within the next few days, maybe early next week, there will be a recording of this available on YouTube, as there will for all of the rest of the Fireside season, which goes through February calendar 24th. What's my life? So yeah, through the end of February, every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m., I will be here talking to lovely human beings who make books. And again, look for the survey. And thank you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. You've been a wonderful hostess. Wonderful. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Hamline Midway. We miss you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.